You need to understand what happened in the Smoky Mountains before you go out there, because the ranger station that handled this incident still will not comment on it. In June of 2018, deep inside Great Smoky Mountains National Park, one of the most remote fire tower corridors in the entire Appalachian Mountains range, a three-person Park Service crew was rotated out to relieve a solo ranger who had been holding a tower post alone for 48 hours. Everything about the rotation was standard until they reached the access road. What they found there told them someone had been expecting them, specifically and in advance. By the following morning, one ranger was dead in the forest. One had walked out into the dark and never come back. And the woman who made it out gave a statement so fragmented that her supervising officer classified the incident under an administrative safety code that has never been publicly defined. Only J.D. Marsh made it out of those mountains with her mind intact. This is what happened to her. The Park Service Ford 250 climbed the access road in second gear, and J.D. Marsh watched the tree line through the passenger window the way she always did, not looking for anything, just looking, the habit of someone still new enough that the mountains hadn't become background yet. She was 26, Philadelphia born. She took the Smokies posting because it scared her a little, because that was the kind of person she was. 1 year in, gear packed the night before, radio battery checked twice, a photograph of her father tucked under the sun visor, him squinting at her trailhead her first week because he forgot his sunglasses and wouldn't admit it. She hadn't touched it in 3 months. The job had started to feel like hers. Thomas Harlan was driving. 34, Sevier County born, 12 years on the job. He knew this road the way he knew his own driveway and had stopped seeing it years ago. Their assignment? Relieve Sterling Cook at Fire Tower 9. Remote post, Northeast Corridor, single-lane service road, dead end at the tower base. Sterling had been up there since Monday on a stormwatch extension, 48 hours, 6 over standard rotation. J.D. worked 4 shifts with Sterling. She respected him the way you respect someone who knows exactly what they are doing and doesn't explain it. She had been looking forward to this rotation. At 10:40 a.m., dispatch radioed that the storm had shifted north and would sit over the ridge for 2 days. A 6-hour rotation became a 2-day hold. The road ran through old-growth hemlock, canopy dense enough to swallow the engine noise. Sound didn't echo up here. It disappeared. J.D. had driven this road 11 times and stopped noticing that particular silence around her 4th shift. She noticed it now. The black-throated blue warblers that nested along this corridor were gone. Every previous drive they marked the second switchback, unconscious, reliable, a signal she hadn't known she was using until it wasn't there. Thomas said nothing. J.D. said nothing, but she stopped watching the tree line casually and started watching it the other way. Sterling's 9 a.m. check-in hadn't come. He wrote that protocol himself. Mandatory. J.D. asked him about it once and got half an answer she had thought about several times since. She almost brought it up with Thomas. The truck hit the switchback, the canopy closed overhead, and the question dissolved the way questions do when part of you already knows the answer isn't going to help. 200 meters from the tower pull-off, the front passenger tire blew. Not a slow leak, a full collapse, the truck lurching hard to the right before Thomas wrestled it to the shoulder. They got out. J.D. crouched at the tire. Barbed wire. A length of it doubled back on itself, laid flat across the road at an angle calculated to catch any vehicle coming up from the south. The wire was old, galvanized, the kind used on livestock fencing in the Valley Farms 15 miles below the park boundary. The cut ends were clean. Someone had carried it up here and placed it deliberately across the only vehicle access route to Tower 9. The angle meant it would catch a truck tire, but not a boot sole. The soil alongside the shoulder smelled like turned earth, wet, dark, recently disturbed, the way a garden bed smells the morning after heavy rain. The road surface was undisturbed. The wire came from the shoulder side. J.D. crouched over it for a long moment and didn't say what she was thinking. She radioed Sterling. No response. She radioed dispatch. Dispatch confirmed Sterling's unit was active and transmitting his location. He was in the tower. But he didn't answer the call. Dispatch tried the tower landline. It rang 14 times. Dispatch logged it as atmospheric interference from the incoming storm and told them to hold position. At 1:15 p.m., Sterling's voice came over J.D.'s radio. Calm, measured. The way he always sounded. He said he could see them from the observation deck, that there were patch materials at the supply shed behind the tower, that he'd be at the truck by 2 p.m. J.D. told him about the wire. A pause. Then, I know. He clicked off before she could ask what that meant. She was still looking at the radio when the sound started. It came from the tree line to the northeast, roughly in the direction Sterling mentioned, back behind the main trail. Rhythmic, wet, organic. Not an animal call and not wind. Something closer to the sound of pressure applied to green wood slowly. A grinding compression that ran for 30 or 40 seconds, stopped, then started again from a position slightly further back in the trees. Like whatever was making it had moved. Thomas listened for 30 seconds. Bear on a deadfall. They do that. He went back to the tire. J.D. didn't say anything. She filed Thomas's explanation the way she filed things she didn't believe but couldn't disprove yet. The sound repositioned again, further back, slightly south, and she tracked it without moving, the way you track something you don't want to acknowledge you're tracking. When Thomas moved to swap the flat, he reached into the truck bed for the lug wrench and stopped. The wrench had been moved from its bracket, lying flat on the bed liner, rotated 180 degrees from how it was stored. He picked it up, used it, replaced it without a word. J.D. watched him find it. She didn't say anything either. The truck had been locked when they parked it. That was the thing she kept returning to while Thomas finished the tire. Not the wire, not the sound, but the wrench. The wire could have been old. The sound could have been a bear. But the wrench meant someone had been inside a locked vehicle on a road with no other access, at some point before they arrived, and had touched exactly one thing and left. Not ransacked, not stolen from. Just visited, adjusted. Like a message that didn't need words because the point wasn't information. The point was to let them know. The sound from the northeast started again, longer this time, unbroken. Closer than its last position. J.D. almost asked Thomas whether he knew about the supply shed Sterling mentioned. It wasn't on any park map, and Sterling had told her about it specifically during her second week, in a way that at the time felt like ordinary conversation, and right now felt like something else entirely. The sound kept running. The question left her the way sound left this corridor, completely without an echo. Sterling didn't arrive by 2 p.m. By 2:40, the road was still empty. The sound had been running intermittently for 90 minutes, repositioning each time, working an arc through the trees, patient and methodical, the way something moves when it isn't chasing but isn't lost either. Thomas was eating in the cab. J.D. stood on the shoulder with her radio, watching the tree line with the focused attention of someone who had stopped pretending she was doing something else. Gravel shifted under her boots as she walked the shoulder. The sound moved again, northwest of its last position, completing more than half a circle around them. She walked further from the truck than she meant to. The sound was inside the tree line, maybe 30 meters back. Then Sterling's voice came over the radio, short and flat. "Don't come into the trees." She stood with the radio pressed to her sternum. The afternoon light cut low through the hemlock. The sound ran somewhere in the dark of the forest, and she held completely still, the way the body does when it is deciding whether what just happened was real. She radioed back. Sterling didn't respond. Thomas got out of the cab without a word. They played it back together. Sterling's voice, his cadence, his way of spacing words. Flat, deliberate. The warning of someone who knew exactly what they were warning against and had decided specifics were a luxury they didn't have. J.D. radioed dispatch and reported everything. The wire, the sound, Sterling's transmission. A supervisor was being routed out. 4 to 5 hours given storm conditions. Hold at the truck. Thomas said they couldn't sit on this road for 5 hours. Sterling was out there. The tower was 200 meters up the trail. Still light. He had never in 12 years called a situation upward before he had eyes on it himself. J.D. said they wait. Thomas was already moving toward the tree line. She followed him. She told herself it was because leaving Thomas alone in there was worse than both of them going in. She would tell dispatch the same thing later. She knew, walking into the hemlocks, that this was the decision she would spend a long time thinking about. The shed trail was unmarked. J.D. navigated from Sterling's description, a route she had needed twice before. Ground fog rose off the warm duff. Her boots sank into the wet forest floor. Thomas was 5 feet behind her. The sound had stopped, and the silence was worse than the sound had been. At least when it was running, she knew where it was. The arrow came out of the northeast and hit Thomas in the left shoulder. He went down to one knee. He didn't go all the way down. J.D. grabbed him by the jacket and they ran. Not the way people run when they decide to, but the way the body runs when it stops asking permission. Back through the hemlocks, fog at their shins, Thomas's breathing hard and ragged at her back. She did not look behind her. 20 meters from the tower, 2 figures stepped out of the tree line and stood, pale, emaciated, bone close to the surface, movement too deliberate, too efficient. They weren't chasing. Positioned north and south of the path, watching J.D. and Thomas run past. The positioning wasn't accidental. It was the positioning of people who already knew where the running went. Fire Tower 9 rose 60 feet out of the ridge rock, 6 stories of creosote-soaked timber and open ironwork, the cab at the top barely the size of a garden shed. The ground-level access door opened into a narrow stairwell, steps steep enough to need the handrail. Thomas hit the door at a stumble, good arm pulling it open, and went up with his injured shoulder pressed against the wall to protect it. Each step pulled a short, controlled breath out of him. J.D. followed, counted 4 half-turn flights, pulled the door shut behind her, and drove the deadbolt home. At the second-level window, the 2 figures were exactly where they stopped. At the tree line, still, not watching the tower, watching the door. The tower groaned, not from wind. The storm was still 2 hours out. The sound came from the timber frame itself, a low structural complaint that traveled up through the floor and into J.D.'s boots. She told herself it was the wood settling. Old buildings did that. It had never come from below before. Thomas was on the second-level bench, jacket cut away from the shoulder, arrow shaft stabilized with tape from the first aid kit. Pale and functional. His radio antenna was cracked from the impact. Hers was cutting in and out as the storm front closed the ridge. The tower landline had gone to static at 3 p.m. The storm hit at 9:40 p.m. Wind first, a sustained pressure that shuddered the entire frame, then rain driving horizontally against the glass. The hemlock canopy below vanished into dark and weather. Clean mountain rain through the window seals, cold mineral stone underneath, and J.D. realized she had been using smell to track the figures outside. The rain erased that. At 10:05 p.m., lightning threw the ridge white. One figure at the base of the tower, moving along the support struts in a low crouch. At 10:12 p.m., smoke curled through the floor gap. She grabbed the extinguisher, got the hatch open, pushed the nozzle into the smoke. Burning creosote, scorched pine resin, something organic underneath she couldn't name. She emptied half the canister before the rain made the decision, sheeting through the open structure and killing the fire in under 10 minutes. She sat with the extinguisher in her lap and understood that whatever was outside had known the rain would do this. The fire wasn't the plan. The fire was to see what they would do. At 10:55 p.m., both figures began climbing the exterior beams. Rain slicked timber, but they moved without slipping, the ease of people who had climbed this structure before. J.D. killed the lights and got Thomas up the interior stairs to the observation cab. She locked the stair door behind them. Glass on 3 sides. Lightning every 40 seconds, each flash throwing climbing shadows across the floor. Thomas against the wall, one good arm, jaw set. J.D. at the stair door, hands cold and wet, her own pulse in her fingertips. One of them pressed its face against the observation glass. Gaunt in the way years do to a face. Bone near the surface, eyes set deep, the ruin of a body running on very little for a long time. It looked at her with no hostility and no fear, just attention. The way you look at something you have been waiting for. J.D. stood 4 feet from the glass and felt the vertigo of almost recognizing something. A face pulling at a memory she couldn't place, seen before in different light, impossible now to locate. Her radio crackled, dead since early evening. Sterling's voice came through, or something using his cadence, his rhythm, repeating a question on a loop, just clear enough to make out the shape of it, the rise at the end. Thomas asked what Sterling was saying. J.D. didn't answer. The lug wrench rotated in a locked truck. Someone had been in that vehicle before they arrived, knew the rotation, knew this road, knew which truck was coming and when. The wire wasn't waiting for any park vehicle, it was waiting for theirs. And Sterling's question, she had heard it before. She couldn't make herself remember where. The figure worked the exterior deck latch from outside. Methodical. It knew exactly where it was. J.D. shoved the storage cabinet against the door. Thomas got his weight behind it with one arm. The latch worked and worked. The radio cut to static. From below, not outside below them, inside the walls, the sound from the forest started. The same rhythmic wet grinding from the tree line, from the hemlocks, from that afternoon. Running steady, rising through the floor, vibrating up through J.D.'s boots. She understood with the clarity of a body that has run out of explanations that the sound had never been outside. It had been here the whole time. The figures stopped working the latch. By 1:30 a.m., the exterior landing was empty. Thomas said the truck radio could reach dispatch through the storm. Said his shoulder was manageable. Said waiting until Friday was not a plan. J.D. told him to wait for daylight. 2 hours. Thomas picked up his jacket and went down the stairs. She listened to each step. The second-level door opened, closed. She watched his flashlight cross the ground below, move through the access path, disappear into the hemlocks. She kept watching after it was gone, the way you watch a door after someone walks through it in case it opens again. It didn't. The storm broke at 6 a.m. The ridge went quiet, a different quiet than the corridor from the day before. Cleaner, the way the world sounds after weather has moved through it. JD was on the observation deck. She hadn't slept. The sound inside the wall stopped sometime before 3 a.m. and hadn't started again. She had stopped tracking time around 2. The rescue helicopter arrived at 8:20 a.m. Fire and rescue, 2 rangers, a medic. They found JD on the deck. They searched the tower and the surrounding forest. Sterling was not found. Thomas was not found. The access path showed no tracks. The storm had erased everything. JD gave her statement carefully, the way someone speaks who knows they are being evaluated as much as heard. She said the sound came from multiple directions over the course of the night, not just the tree line. She said she saw 3 figures at one point, not 2. The third near the base of the tower earlier in the night, at a time she couldn't precisely place. She said Sterling's voice on the radio was asking something specific, something she recognized, and then said she couldn't remember what it was. She said Thomas's decision to go back to the truck was reasonable. She said the tower door was unlocked when he left. The rescue log noted the door was locked from the inside when they arrived. The official record closed the way official records do. Sterling Cook, missing in line of duty, search concluded September 2018, case open and inactive. Thomas Harlan, missing, presumed lost, no remains recovered. J.D. Marsh, acute stress response, administrative leave, returned to desk assignment in Charlotte by November. The barbed wire trap was logged as incidental debris, probable prior agricultural use. The sound does not appear in any document. Before the helicopter lifted, J.D. walked back to the F-250. She used her key. She checked the sun visor. Her father's photograph was gone. The bracket was intact. The photograph had been removed cleanly from a locked vehicle at some point between when she and Thomas drove up that road and when rescue arrived. No broken glass. No damage to the lock. She stood with the visor in her hand and looked at the empty bracket. She didn't report it. She had a feeling by that point that reporting it would produce the same result as everything else she reported. A log entry, a classification, a silence. What the Smoky Mountains took that week, 1 man whole, 1 man's certainty, and 1 woman's ability to sleep through the night without checking the locks, has never been officially named. Naming it would require acknowledging that something up there understood their rotation schedule, knew their vehicle, and was patient enough to have been in position before they arrived. The sound J.D. heard inside the walls of that tower, the one that spent the whole day moving through the forest, repositioning, closing in, she described it once to a friend 8 months later. She said it sounded like something learning to breathe in a place it had been practicing a long time. Sterling's question, the one the radio repeated all night, came back to her 3 weeks later. She was at her desk in Charlotte, filing a routine report, when she remembered it. She hasn't told anyone what it was. She says she's still deciding whether it changes anything. In these mountains, the thing you can't explain isn't always what's following you. Sometimes it's what was already there when you arrived.